Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government.
Many people are plagued by disinformation in their daily lives, including me, who see disinformation almost every day. A new study in the journal Nature suggests that many Americans share disinformation on social media because they do not pay attention to the accuracy of the content, not necessarily because they cannot distinguish between true and false news. From daily life to international events, disinformation is everywhere, causing trouble in our lives and becoming a tool for some people to make profits. Today, we will discuss it carefully. In February 2003, Colin Powell, the then Secretary of State of the United States, appeared at the United Nations Security Council with a test tube containing a bottle of washing powder, causing the Iraqi people to suffer from nearly 8 years of war and suffering, which was not the first time in the history of the United States wars. Let us review the history from the Spanish-American War in 1898 to the Vietnam War in 1964, and then to the Iraq War just 12 years ago. The United States has always used the news machine to preach the rationality of the U.S. military action to the public, thus covering the war with a cloak of justice. So why did the United States in history use false news to create an excuse for war? Under the charge of disinformation, what wars did the U.S. military launch in history? Today, we will talk about the news machine behind the war launched by the United States, and together we will expose the hypocrisy of Western countries. The Spanish-American War, which broke out on April 21, 1898, may be the earliest war in which the United States used fake news to start a war. In 1898, an uprising broke out in the Spanish colony of Cuba. Due to their inability to confront the rebellious Cuban people, the Spanish authorities had to send diplomatic staff to mediate with the Cuban uprising forces. This international news that happened near the United States immediately attracted the attention of various news media in the United States. At that time, Hearst, who was known as the king of the newspaper industry in the United States, immediately sent reporters from the News Morning News to Spain to search for news clues about the war. When the reporter of News Morning told Hearst that there was no war news worth exploring in Spain, Hearst sent a telegram to the reporter saying, "You provide the news, and I provide the war." At the behest of Hearst, a false news story about the Spanish fleet sinking American merchant ships in Cuba spread to the United States. After the publication of this false news story, it triggered great indignation from all sectors of American society. People from all over the country petitioned the McKinley administration to declare war on Spain in the name of protecting Cuba and American expatriates. On April 21, 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out. On June 10th of the same year, the U.S. troops landed at Guantanamo Bay and defeated the local Spanish army. On July 1st, the U.S. military captured San Juan, Puerto Rico, Spain. On August 13th, the U.S. troops, with the assistance of the Philippine Insurgent Army, captured Manila, the capital of the Spanish Philippines colony. The successive defeats of the frontline army forced Spain to sign a peace treaty with the United States on December 10, 1898. In this treaty, the United States seized Spanish territories such as Cuba, Guam, and Puerto Rico, and incorporated the Philippines into its own colony. From then on, it stepped out of the American continent and became a colonial empire spanning the Pacific Ocean. If the United States tasted the sweetness of false news to create war in the Spanish-American War in 1898, then the Vietnam War in 1964 made the United States taste the bitterness of false news to create war. In 1955, the North Vietnamese launched the Vietnam Unification movement, and the Vietnam War broke out. At the beginning of the war, the United States adopted the intervention method of special warfare, providing money and guns and giving military and technical assistance to the South Vietnamese army, allowing the South Vietnamese forces to counterbalance the North Vietnamese. However, as the South Vietnamese army was losing ground, the United States realized that it was necessary to send troops in person to contain the southern expansion of North Vietnam. On August 2, 1964, after the news of the attack on the U.S. warship Maddox by 3 North Vietnamese patrol boats was transmitted to the United States, the U.S. political circles stated that the attack on the U.S. fleet is equivalent to the participation of the U.S. in the war. On August 5th, the then U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered the dispatch of hundreds of warplanes to bombard the areas of Nha An, Hung Gia, and Thanh Hoa in North Vietnam, officially intervening in the Vietnam War. Although international investigations shortly after the incident claimed that the attack on the U.S. warship Maddox by a North Vietnamese patrol boat in the Gulf of Tonkin was a purely fabricated fake news story, a self-directed and self-staged event by the U.S. military fleet, the warlike mood in the U.S. society did not immediately break away from the Vietnam battlefield, but instead further increased its military input into the Vietnam battlefield. In the 9-year-long Vietnam local war, the U.S. military invested up to 600,000 troops and lost more than $700 billion US, and 58,000 U.S. soldiers paid with their lives. In the 21st century, the United States, as the world's only superpower, once again played the trick of using fake news to create war. The war directed by the American fake news was the Iraq War that broke out in 2003, who held a white powder test tube and vowed to claim that Iraq was hiding weapons of mass destruction, also said, "The speech at the United Nations Security Council in 2003 left a disgraceful page in my life." Can fake news bring justice to the war in the United States? The fake news used to create excuses for U.S. foreign wars is only a cloak of justice for the U.S. wars, which cannot change the unjust nature of U.S. foreign wars.